Welcome back, everybody. Well, today is March 8th, and it is International Women's Day. There have been some incredibly influential and important women throughout history, and I want to take some time in the coming days and weeks, here and there, to share some of the stories of some of my favorite influential women in history. Today, I want to talk about someone that maybe you wouldn't expect to be at the top of my list, but this is somebody who I feel is one of the most important women of the 20th century. She's certainly one of the most important authors of the 20th century, and her name was Anne Frank. Many of us are a little bit familiar with her story. Many of us read her diary growing up in school. It was assigned for school projects, at least here in America. But there's a lot more to her story that I think maybe people don't know and don't realize. So I wanted to take a few minutes just to watch together the video about Anne Frank. The video is called Who is Anne Frank? And it comes from the Anne Frank house, which is in Amsterdam. I'm going to be announcing very soon the details of my planned trip to the Netherlands, which is going to be coming at the end of April. I'm still waiting on some information before I can pass that on to you guys, but my first stop when I fly into Amsterdam, I'm planning for that to be the Anne Frank house. It's that big a deal to me that I make sure I get there. So let's go ahead and start into this video, and then I'll be sharing some of my thoughts as we go along. And then I want to share some quotes from Anne Frank and why I feel she's so influential at the end. Here we go.
Anne Frank was a Jewish girl who became famous for the diary she wrote during the Second World War. She was born in the German city of Frankfurt in 1929.
And this is one of the things that I think a lot of people don't realize. I certainly didn't when I was a kid growing up. I just assumed that she was from the Netherlands because that is where her story takes place, at least the part of the story that we're all familiar with during the Second World War. But her family is actually a Jewish German family who fled Germany because of the events that were taking place in the 1930s.
She had a sister, Margot, who was 3 years older. Things were going badly in Germany. Unemployment was high and many people were poor. At the same time, Adolf Hitler and his Nazi party were gaining supporters by promising to solve the country's problems. The Nazis hated the Jews and blamed them for the problems. When the Nazis came to power in 1933, hostility to the Jews increased.
Now, we all know that this is not a new thing, hostility toward Jewish people and toward other groups of people. This is something that has happened in many countries throughout history. It was just taken to a very different level in 1930s Germany. And it escalated. It didn't happen overnight. It's not like the party came to power and then the next day they were shipping people off to extermination camps. It was an escalation that happened, and they went through many phases and many rampings up of this until it was actually during World War II where they really kind of eventually came up with what they called the final solution. But the Frank family didn't wait around for any of that.
Anne's parents, Otto and Edith, decided to flee to the Netherlands. They settled in Amsterdam here on Merwedeplein. Anne soon felt at home. She went to school, learned Dutch, and made new friends.
And you know, you think about that, oh, she learned Dutch, just like that. It is much easier for children to learn a new language than it is for us adults who are set in their ways. I know when my wife and I, our niece, was adopted from Guatemala when she was 5. She showed up here in 2012 not speaking a word of English, and it seemed like almost overnight she was speaking fluent English, and now she doesn't even remember any Spanish. Like, it just happened so quick for her. And now to talk to her, you'd never know that she hadn't grown up here. So, you know, kids are very resilient and very interesting in that way. My son's learning German right now, and he's picking it up so much faster than I am. He's 9 years old.
6 years later, war broke out across Europe. In 1939, Nazi Germany invaded Poland, and in 1940, the German army occupied the Netherlands. The Nazi occupiers made life increasingly difficult for Jews.
Jews have to wear a Jewish star. Jews have to hand in their bicycles. Jews are not allowed in the tram. Jews are not allowed to ride in cars. Jews must attend Jewish schools, and so on and so forth.
In the summer of 1942, after Anne's sister, Margot, was ordered to report for a so-called labour camp, the Francke family went into hiding behind Otto's business on the Prinsengracht.
So this is one thing I will say about the Francke family. They always seemed to have a better understanding of what was really going on than most people. You know, when a lot of people stuck around in Germany, they fled. And when people are being sent to labor camps, which, you know, a lot of people don't realize, not everyone was automatically sent to death. A lot of them were considered to be used for slave labor, basically. Many of them worked to death, and that was actually what happened to the Francke family. They weren't sent to an extermination camp when they were eventually taken.
They were joined there later by the Van Pels family and Fritz Pfeffer. The 8 people in hiding were helped by loyal staff and friends of Otto's, Miep and Jan Hies, Johann Voskuil and his daughter Bep, Victor Kugler and Johannes Kleiman.
And what's cool about this, and this is something I'm going to be sharing down the road.
By loyal staff and friends of Otto's, Miep and Jan Hies.
So one of the other stories I'll be sharing, you guys hear me talk all the time about my work with Rachel's Challenge, about how my daughter is named after Rachel Joy Scott. And there's a lot of parallels between Rachel Scott and Anne Frank. I'm not trying to imply that the two are equally influential or anything like that, but there are a lot of parallels between their lives. And what ties the two stories together is this lady here, Miep Gies. And we actually share Miep's story in Rachel's Challenge because Rachel Scott's family that I work for actually got to know Miep Gies. And Miep became very familiar with Rachel's story. Miep was the one who rescued Anne's diary after she was taken to Bergen-Belsen. And probably the last photo ever taken of Miep Gies was her waving out the window to Rachel Scott's dad and stepmom after they had come for a visit. She died just a few days after that. She was like 100 years old when she died. It was very recent. And I asked Rachel Scott's stepmom, my dear friend Sandy Scott, you know, they've been to the White House several times. They've met all these famous people over the years. Chuck Norris is on the board of Rachel's Challenge. They've met Elton John and all these famous figures throughout time. And I asked her, I said, out of all the famous people you've met, presidents, things like that, who was the most memorable for you? And she said it was Miep Gies. There was just something incredible about this woman. And Miep wasn't the only one who was helping to hide the Francke family, but she was one of the people who saved their lives for a couple of years.
Gies, Johann Voskuil and his daughter Bep, Victor Kugler and Johannes Kleiman.
Heroes all
Meanwhile, the Nazis had tightened their grip, organizing raids and arresting and deporting Jews to so-called labor camps. In reality, these were concentration and death camps. In her diary, Anne wrote about living in the hiding place, the war, and her thoughts and feelings.
Which I think they called the annex. It was kind of this, it's like upstairs and then there was like a secret room, like a secret passageway that led to it. And they hid them out for a couple of years, and there's still speculation. I've seen news stories to this day about speculation about who they think betrayed them eventually.
I feel bad for lying in a warm bed while my dearest friends are out there somewhere, thrown or fallen to the ground. And that only because they are Jews.
An appeal from the Dutch government in London inspired Anne to rework her diary entries into a book. Before she had finished, however, their hiding place was discovered, and all 8 were captured on the 4th of August 1944. They were deported to the concentration and death camp Auschwitz-Birkenau. Miep Gies and Bep Voskuil, 2 of the helpers, found the diaries Anne had left behind. Miep kept them in case Anne ever came back. But she didn't come back. In February 1945, Anne and Margot died of typhus in appalling conditions in the concentration camp Bergen-Belsen.
And here's what's so incredibly tragic about all of this. They were captured in August. 6 months later, they're still alive in 1945 because they weren't sent to extermination. They were sent to Bergen-Belsen, and they were alive. They were alive up until a few weeks before the camp was liberated. They were still alive. It was that close. They came so close to surviving this thing. And their mother passed away as well, but their father survived.
Anne was 15. Of the 8 people, only Anne's father, Otto, survived the war. When he read Anne's diaries after the war, they made a deep impression. He discovered how much writing had meant to her.
No one who doesn't write can know how fine it is. And if I don't have the talent to write for newspapers or books, well then, I can always go on writing for myself.
Otto read how Anne had hoped to publish a book.
Yep.
So he carried out her wish.
One of the things she wrote in her diary was she says, "My greatest wish is to be a famous author." And she is. Her diary, which I think was published under the name The Diary of a Young Girl, was one of the best-selling nonfiction books of the 20th century. I think it's in the top 10 all time, at least in the 20th century, and it was only published in the last half of the century. That's how influential this young girl was.
Anne's story about life in hiding and the war is read all over the world. Her diary has been translated into more than 70 languages. The hiding place is now a museum and welcomes more than 1 million visitors a year.
And her diary's on display there. And I was watching a video the other day of that someone made visiting. And there don't seem to be a lot of good videos of that, so I'm definitely planning to make one when I go. Someone visiting the Anne Frank house, as it's called today. And when they walked into the room, and there was the diary right there. It was pretty overwhelming for me. And I have a feeling that it'll be much the same when I go there. Just some thoughts about Anne Frank. There's nothing more special about her than any of the other millions of people, Jews and non-Jews, who died during the Holocaust. But she puts a face to it. I think that's why people are so captured by her story. That, and she was an incredible writer who gives us insight into one of the darkest moments of history from a perspective that we very rarely are able to get. Someone who was actually in hiding, someone who was going through as a teen. I mean, think about it. Being a teenager is hard anyway. But being a teenager, hiding, fearing for your life every single day, having to hide in the attic of a building, never being able to go anywhere, having people having to smuggle things into you, while all the people you know who are like you are being hauled off and you don't know what happened to them. That's some heavy stuff. And she articulated what that felt like, but also talked about what it was like to be a teenage girl and all the things that she was experiencing that many teenage girls can relate to, and talking about her dreams for the future, but also her outlook on life. Like, one of my favorite quotes of hers is, here's a girl who's going through all of that and just wrote some incredible things like, you can always give something, even if it's only kindness. And she would write things like, despite everything that has happened, I still believe that there's good in the world. And, it's just incredible. I want to read some more quotes from her. Let me pull some up. So here we go. I'm just going to read some of these. How wonderful it is that nobody need wait a single moment before starting to improve the world. And remember, you got to read all of these in the context in which she's writing. Hiding out, being a Jew, knowing that she could be hauled off to a camp, not knowing what happened to her friends. Think of all the beauty still left around you and be happy. I've found that there is always some beauty left in nature, sunshine, freedom, in yourself. These can all help you. No one has ever become poor by giving. I don't think of all the misery, but of all the beauty that still remains. The best remedy for those who are afraid, lonely, or unhappy is to go outside, somewhere where they can be quite alone with the heavens, nature, and God. Because only then does one feel that all is as it should be, and that God wishes to see people happy amidst the simple beauty of nature. As long as this exists, and it certainly always will, I know that there will always be comfort for every sorrow, whatever the circumstances may be. And I firmly believe that nature brings solace in all troubles. Look at how a single candle can both defy and define the darkness. And on and on and on it goes. I'm planning on reading The Diary of Anne Frank between now and when I go to Amsterdam. I expect I will probably have more to say about it when we get there. But let me know your thoughts. Do you have a favorite quote from Anne Frank? Is there something about her story that always jumped out at you that you'd like to share with all of us? And is there another woman that you'd like me to talk about? We're going to do some more videos like this, talking about influential women in history. And I know while it's a small number of you, there are women among you who follow this channel, and I would love especially to hear from you. What women have inspired you over time? Let me know in the comment section below. Thanks for watching.